Hello and welcome to another video. Today we are going to be making this absolutely lovely little card for the autumn season. I thought that we hadn't done very many so far, and I thought that this autumn goodness set would really do the trick. So I've actually designed this card here using a few really neat little components all compiled together here to get a nice simple. This card may look really fancy, but it's actually surprisingly simple to make. I'll have a list of everything that you need in order to make the card here listed at the bottom of the video, but direct links will be on my blog post as well should you wish to add any of these items to your next Stampin' Up! Order. So let me get started by just showing you this stamp set. One of the things I love about this is that a lot of these are kind of just generic autumnal looks rather than, specifically Halloween or even Thanksgiving. Like, it's just kind of the autumn, and I love that about it. So I do use in this card, I use the brushed metal metallic cardstock that they have, and this is the piece I use. It's like this copper look. I use the coppery piece. There are lots of different colors. I used the piece here from the Gilded Autumn paper, the DSP. I used here, this die right here is actually from the Tasteful Labels dies. I use a little bit of the twine, the linen thread here. And then I used, for my sentiment, this is just a 1/2 inch wide strip of Very Vanilla, and this here is a 3/4 strip of Very Vanilla, not Very Vanilla, of Mint Macaron, to kind of tie it all together and add a little bit of kind of a background for it so it's not such a stark contrast. So let me show you, and this ribbon here is from the same suite of products. Let me show you where that is in the catalog. I thought I had it handy and I did not. I was looking in my catalog for other things earlier, so that explains that. Okay, so here we go. It is right here. It's the Basket Weave and Metallic Ribbon Combo Pack. So you actually get both ribbons, this beautiful copper color, as well as the Mint Macaron. The Mint Macaron is wider. It is a 1/2 inch, whereas the copper one is 1/8 of an inch, which is kind of nice because you could pair them up together for some really neat effects. So let me show you how to make this card. Like I said, I made it kind of low key, but I can show you a few ways that you could step this up if you wanted to do so. So first things first, let's get our stamping done. Also, at the end of the video, I made another card with this same stamp set that I'll show you how I made it. I'm not going to make a secondary card, but if there's enough interest, I would happily do so. Otherwise, I think I'll make different ones in these next couple of videos. So first, to start off with, you need a few materials. I pre-embossed this piece. You need the tin tile embossing folder. Let me show you what that looks like. Ooh, gotta put some things away. So it looks like this, where it has this beautiful pattern here. And this leads to this beautiful embossing, which is, a little bit busy for some cards, which is why I decided to cut mine down to the, smaller portion of the card. Originally, I had actually made it a whole panel. So like, I'll cheat and I'll show you here. You can see that this piece extends further out right here. Right, that cardstock. And that's because originally I had thought I would do something with like the entirety of this piece, but I found it to be just a little too busy. And so I decided, you know what, I'm just going to cut it down, and that's exactly what I did. So these pieces here, it doesn't super matter how large you make them, as long as when they are fully adhered together, they are 5 1/4 inch long. So my dimensions, it really doesn't matter too much what you do. So let's actually adhere these two pieces together first. So I don't want it to go over too much, so I don't want to put the glue or the adhesive on this piece, because I'd rather it be I'd rather have extra here where it'll just adhere to my cardstock. So instead of putting the adhesive on this piece, I'm actually going to put it on this piece. And here's the trick, right? So I need it to be 5 1/4, and every one of these little squares is 1/4 of an inch. So this piece right here is 3 inches long. So I need this to be at 2 1/4 sticking out over here. So here would be, let's see, 1, 2, oh, actually that's exactly 2 1/4. So essentially I need just this 1/4 inch overlap is what I need in order to get my card to be exactly as I need it to be. So for this, I really don't want to mess around. I'm just going to use my Tombow because I really don't want it to kind of go over the line and then I have to deal with like a sticky mess. So I'm just going to do just a nice little strip, and I take this, because it's embossed, you'll want to make sure you kind of apply a little bit more pressure than you might normally feel the need to for some of these cards. So I'm just going to lay it down, overlap it, make sure here that it's level, because if I don't have it straight on, I will definitely be able to tell. So I'm just going to push that down gently. You don't want to push it too hard either, because you can see that it's actually like debossed on the other side. And if you push it down too hard, it will definitely move. So here we go. We've got my piece. It has now been adhered. So now, before you actually put this piece down, I wanted to use this ribbon here to kind of hide the stark difference there. So I just wrap it around, and I actually just use glue dots on the opposite side. I don't see where I have my bigger glue dots handy, so I'll just use a series of mini ones. So I'll put maybe a mini one on the top, a mini one on the bottom, and then an extra one for good measure. You do not want to use your liquid glue for ribbon. Ribbon does not do well with liquid glue. That's not to say it's impossible if like that is the only thing you have handy, but just make sure that you give it a lot of time, and do not be surprised if it seeps through your ribbon and is visible. So I don't recommend it. But any kind of dry glue, so glue dot or the tape, the glue runners, those will all be fine choices. But a glue, like a liquid glue, is really not a good idea for this. So I'm just going to wrap it around. And in this case here, it really doesn't matter where you started, as long as you know that it's not going to show. And this one actually looks like it might be a hair higher, which is kind of fun. It'll make both my cards a little bit different. So, and you can actually compare to make sure that like your line is straight, and it's maybe a little off. So let's actually bring this down just a hair, and there we go. So now this piece is across exactly where we want it to be, and I can adhere it down. So I think it picked up a stray cat hair. All right, so now I'm actually going to use my stamp and seal. My stamp and seal to adhere this down to my paper. And on my sample, I realized that I was a little too lax with it, in that it seems like it's pulling up just a smidge on the side. And so I recommend, because you're using two different papers with two different thicknesses, it might be wise to be a little bit more generous with your adhesive. So let's go ahead, adhere that bad boy down. And this helps it where your ribbon is less likely to kind of come up as a result. So there's that. And we've got essentially our background ready to go. So notice here, it's going to be a little bit different because it's a slightly different size piece. But what's nice is that you'll still see a little bit more of the beautiful copper. So I wanted to keep this card fairly simple. However, if you want to step it up, this would be the perfect time to do some embossing of the heat variety. So we used to sell copper embossing powder. I believe that is no longer current. However, there is gold, there is silver. You could even try to mix them if you really wanted to create a different kind of pattern. I've seen some really neat things that have been done with coloring of things. So you could definitely try different things. You could have picked other paper that had the gold in it and used the gold brushed metallics cardstock too, and then done this in gold. That would have been a lovely thing too. However, I wanted to keep my cards simple, so I actually just used my cinnamon cider ink pad, and I am stamping on here this kind of hay stalk. I don't know, it's not really a bale of hay, but it's essentially a binding there, a piece of hay bound together there, a series of them at least. So there's that. Because I am using a photopolymer stamp set, I am using my Stampin' Pierce mat, And I am going to just tap, 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 tap. You don't want to push too hard because otherwise you'll get a lot of ink everywhere. Let me show you what this looks like on white. So this is just, actually, this is my label with my address on it from my paper pumpkin. So that video is coming up. But notice here, that's full strength. And here it is stamped off once. So notice it's way more muted. But if I had that on here, it would be really, really kind of sad looking. It would look kind of sickly, and that's not helpful. So instead, I chose to use Very Vanilla, which would add kind of to the warmth of the card. And I still did it full strength. And as you can tell, it did dry. Oh, let me show you here. It did dry a little bit more muted, and I think it paired itself well to the copper. If you don't have cinnamon cider, which is a possibility, it is a relatively new color. If you do not have cinnamon cider, I recommend soft suede might be a good choice. You might want to experiment with stamping it off as well to see if it still looks as good as you want it to. And while we have our ink out, I'm going to go ahead and use my sentiment. I picked the Plant Kindness and Harvest Love. I thought that way it can be used if you happen to send out cards for the Thanksgiving season, you can. But if you don't, this could be used for any season, right? Plant Kindness and Harvest Love. You could even put Happy Birthday inside if you really wanted to. So that is all the stamping I did. I did not put anything on the inside. Mint Macaron is our card base, so it is 5.5 by 8.5, scored at 4 1/4. I find it to be a light enough color where I don't feel compelled to put an inside piece. However, if you wanted to, you could absolutely stamp like another one of these on the inside. There are other beautiful images. You could stamp the wheelbarrow or these kind of floral arrangements here. Lots of options there. So now you essentially just have to assemble the rest. The next thing that you need to do is to line up your piece within your die or your punch. I'm using the Lovely Labels Pick-a-Punch, and I'm using this one here, though part of me kind of wanted to try the other one, and I think I might for this card because I think it might go well with the curves of our die there. So let's try that. Let's be a little, that way they'll be different and you can tell me which one you liked better. So, this, before I start cutting it, this strip I think was, what, 2.5 inches. It really doesn't matter too much the length because all I'm doing, oh, that's not great. I had it at a weird little angle. That is the downside of using a small strip, is that sometimes it'll get a little bit wonky in terms of its angle. There we go. And since I punched it out twice, you want to do the same this time. Well, let's see. And if I messed up, I can just redo it. Because a 1/2 inch strip, I've got lots of those. Ooh, yeah, that's not great. Let's try again. Let's get another 1/2 inch strip. Alrighty. And I actually cut my strip from just a scrap rather than, because sometimes I'll have lots of scraps of Very Vanilla and other times I do not. And so for the purposes of this, I decided not to. See, and maybe this was just a sign. I should not have messed with it. I should have just kept it to the original. Problem solved, huh? Alright, so I'm just going to line it up at the 1/2 inch. I don't even need to do anything real fancy with it. I'm just going to line it up. And the other trick you could do to make sure that it's going to come out right every time is you could use a Post-it note to kind of be a placeholder for it, so that way you don't actually have to use your fingers. So I'm going to just boop. There we go. Actually, I feel like that's even a straighter image than the first time. So that's good. So now let's go back to my original. So rather than just sticking it in, I think this time, just to be sure, I'm going to line it up this way and punch it upside down. Normally that is what I do, but maybe I was just feeling too confident. So there's that, and here's a trick that you may or may not know of. So this piece right here that it just popped out, keep it and look. If you put it here, for example, you could see, well, if I cut my paper strip right here, this is exactly how much is going to be chopped off from my punch. And that looks really close to even. So let's actually push it back just a little bit more. And that looks a little bit better. So now I just hold my piece I get my paper snips, and then I just cut that right down the side. I hold it flush, and now when I use this piece and pop it in, make sure to flip it around. Oop, push it all the way in. Oh, it got caught. Oh. I have noticed that if my paper is not flat, it will get caught sometimes, so be gentle with it. And there we go. So now, go make sure it's all the way there. Pop, and centered. Isn't that great? So you could keep these pieces and just have them handy for each of the dimensions, the 1/2 inch, the 3/4, and the 1 inch. You could totally do that, or just, you know, when you pop out one of them, you could use that as you go. So this piece here is a little bit longer on both sides. I believe it was 3 inches. Yeah, 3 inches long. I'm going to go ahead and use it, and notice here it fits right in. But again, once you get it in, I do recommend, just to avoid my mistake, that you just push that in, and then do the same on the opposite side. This one I feel like is a little bit more fickle in terms of getting it really centered because of the little frill of the design, but I think it's still a nice little look, and so I think it's worth the headache sometimes. So just the 3-inch piece, and take a look at that. Isn't that great? So now it's got almost a completely even border on the opposite side. So same thing, I'll use my Stampin' Seal right down the middle, and there we go. And now what I recommend, use the grid paper if you have it, and if you don't, get yourself some grid paper. I use it all the time, especially when designing cards, because I can actually use it. Let's put it a little bit higher here, because I'm using it here to see, well, how close is it to the opposite side. And notice I am intentionally not pushing on it yet, so that I can make sure I have it centered. Whoop, there we go. And there we go. So now we've got our sentiment. We're done with the punch. I did also pre-die cut this in case you have not yet seen the die. It's right here. It's one of the largest ones in the set, and I think it's just lovely because not only does it die cut, but let me see if I can show you here. It embosses right here, and I thought that was just so lovely. It adds like a little bit of a border to it. Okay, so now we've got our sentiment. We've got our stamped and die cut image. All we need now is to add them to our card, and then to embellish it with our little baker's twine, or I guess it's linen thread. That's what it's called, linen thread. So let's go ahead. If we hold it over, notice that this one here, if I kind of center it but not really center it, that's where it goes. So this piece is significantly higher up, but I kind of like it. And if we put it a little bit higher, excuse me, I'm about to sneeze. Oh, excuse me. Woo. If we put it a little bit higher, then this makes a little bit more sense. So you do want to make sure that there's a certain amount of spacing. So I'm actually going to adhere this down first, because it's going to be easier to make this work if this is an extra kind of guiding force for you. So for this, I am going to use just a strip of the Stampin' Seal. You can use the Stampin' Seal Plus if you're worried with the raised edges. You could totally do that. So again, here's my paper. I'm going to put it down here. Let's see. If I set it down gently, looks like right about there. Looks really good. Looks pretty even. So I just push it down gently, and there we go. So now this is the second to last thing. All we need to do after this is add our cute little bow. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to place it above and say, okay, so I need I used oh my goodness, just in dimensionals. Whew, I'm drawing a blank. I used dimensionals to pop this up, so I need one definitely here. I'd avoid putting them directly onto the ribbon. So as long as I put them here, kind of where this pops out, and then maybe in the middle and at the top, and that will get us exactly what I need to make this a stellar card. So let's go ahead and do that. One at the bottom. We said opposite sides, and then a few at the top. I'm going to do middle and straight top. So there's that. And so now all I have to do, and in case you're wondering about my stamped image, it is quite dark still at this moment. However, it will dry to this color too. So it's not like it's going to stay this dark. Like you can see, it's significantly darker there. So now I'm just gonna center it. Make sure it's even. In this case, you want to center it kind of vertically as well as horizontally, which is why I recommend, again, don't push it down until you're happy with where it is. So now you could leave it at this. You already have ribbon, so you don't really need to add the twine, but I had this from an old paper pumpkin, and I was like, ooh, that would kind of tie in the sort of rustic feel. If you have the same type of thing where it has these like little kinks in the twine, just put your fingers through it and sort of almost like you're running your hand through hair. It'll help kind of work those out. And I often, rather than having a set amount of twine and sometimes even a set amount of ribbon, I actually just make the bow on the spool, or in this case on the sort of spool, the like piece of cardstock, because then that way I can kind of mess with it and determine, well, how big do I want the bows? How big do I want the, you know, the pieces coming down? And so this looks like a pretty good mix for me. I'll use just my generic little ribbon scissors. I use a piece of ribbon on my scissors to indicate that they are my ribbon scissors so that I don't inadvertently use them for something else. And because they give us so many of these when we have our paper pumpkins, I actually still have plenty of my mini glue dots, which is great. I can use them for these kinds of projects where I don't have to bust out my like whole collection of glue dots. So there's that. It's a little bit different, but pretty much the same. Again, this is going to dry a lot lighter, so when I take pictures of it, you'll see what I mean. Here we have our strip here with our sentiment. It's a very similar, but you know, they're all going to be a little bit different as you put them into the die. But let me know which one of these is your favorite. I kind of like this in that it is, I don't know, like I like the division of the card better, but I don't know. I feel like they're very, very similar in the sense that they're near identical, but let me know if you have a favorite, if you think you want to try the embossing to see what that looks like. It's kind of busy in the middle, but I think that it could still look really well, a really cohesive look if it was embossed. So if you've got some of that copper embossing powder lying around, you could totally try that and see what it looks like. Or if you want to use the gold paper from the Gilded Autumn paper and the metallics cardstock, maybe that would be a really cool other look that you could do. And you could even use, you know, a different image to get that look if you really wanted to make it your own. So if you need any of these materials, feel free to get in touch. If you don't have a demonstrator and you would like me to be that person for you, I would be happy to do so. If you need any help with ordering anything, or if you want to just subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you can see more card suggestions in the future, feel free to do that on the subscribe button below. And like I mentioned before, I do have an extra card I did make ahead of time that I'll show you. If you like it, I'll show you how to make it, but it's not very complex. It is this card right here, and I thought it was just beautiful. So similar, I used the same die cut here. I used a different image. I used, and you might not believe me, I used the Gilded Autumn paper as well. That's what this sheet here is. But I used the side that has all of those like gilded pumpkins on it. And then here is a piece of this fence die right here, which not only die cuts, but also, I don't think you can see it, there you go, embosses it too while we're at it. And I actually cheated. You can see here, I actually, oh, maybe you can't. I actually cut them right in the middle here, and then I stuck a little bit here, and then I stuck the rest of it here. So it actually is a much smaller piece, but you can't tell. So I used here the, oh, what's it called? The Timeless Label Punch, something like that. I'll have to look it up. And so I made this card here. I used my blends to color it in. I used them to tie in this mint macaron. I put the ribbon behind the fence. I just thought this was a really lovely card. So simple to make, but you do need a few things like the ribbon if you wish, or you could use a different one. You do need the dies for this one from this set, but you could always make your own or use a different die if you'd like for the background. Lots of good choices. This one I thought you might like, especially because it brings out the blends which is always fun to play with. If you need anything, let me know. Otherwise, I'll subscribe and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!